Hey there, Nick with CC Minis here, and today I'm going to show you how to paint every single type of Warhammer 40k terrain except for one. And we'll go over why in just a little bit. And we're going to do all of this with absolutely free 3D printable models that we printed on Creality's new K1 printer. Alright, let's do this. First on the list of 40k 10th edition's terrain features is craters and rubble. In-game, these give the benefit of cover to all units that are standing on top of them. So we're going to use some nice large craters that I shrunk down vertically so we don't get too many wobbly models. Now for full transparency, Creality sent this printer to me to test out and feature in a video. No money was changed hands or anything like that, but they did send the printer for free. I'll cover my honest thoughts on the machine towards the end of the video. Alright, on to painting. We're going to start with a gray primer, brushed on with a fat brush, which is specifically manufactured for painting minis that are at a 1:1 scale. This is a little unwieldy, but gets the job done fast. Typically I'd use a rattle can for this, but here in Chicago the air quality is just awful right now, so I don't want to make it any worse. After it's primed up, I mixed up a nice dark brown out of brown, a different brown, a small Smurf's fart of blue, and another brown. I don't want to waste my good paint on terrain, so I'm using paints that I've had for a long time and don't hit my palette very often. If you aren't a paint hoarder like me, consider getting some cheap craft paints instead to save a few bucks. Once that base brown is all around town, I switch to a cheap makeup brush that I don't mind abusing. Don't ruin your good paintbrushes on terrain either, especially printed terrain. It's just not worth it. I use this to splotch on some lighter brown all over the edges of the crater and any raised bits to give some dimension back to the smushed terrain, then mixed in an off-white to brighten things up a bit, and went back to stippling this time, focusing on just the edges and the centers of areas that I stippled on before. Now this is looking a little disjointed for me, so to top it all off, I squirted on some blobs of transparent brown and massaged them all over the model, giving a final cohesive filter. And with that, we have some craters. They're fine, probably the most boring type of terrain in 40k, so let's move on to some barricades and fuel pipes. These little obstacles have some very interesting rules in 40k, so I definitely want to include them on my table. They can be moved over as if they aren't there. Models can fight over the top of them, but they still grant cover to models behind them. I had some trouble finding STLs to use for the pipes. But in the middle of this super dope pack of bits that are meant to accessorize pop cans is a little railing that will work perfectly. And these printed so fast, even scaled up by about 50%. 3 sets of double the trouble pipes took just over an hour on the K1. I want these to be metal pipes, so I started out with a pure black primer. Then went over them all with a dry brush of Vallejo model color, using a cheap makeup brush. This allows me to control the paint more and leave the underbelly of the pipes darker than the top belly. After the dry brush, I got the brush a bit wetter with paint and stippled on metal color from the top. With that done, I brought out some bronze to distinguish these pipe holder things. My dad is a plumber and probably a little disappointed that I don't know the word for this particular pipe part. Is it a coupler? Sorry, Dad. After that, we have the base coats down and we can move on to some weathering. For these pretty pipes, I wanted them to be grungy as heck, super corroded after many years of use. So I'm going to try out some Dirty Down Verdigris and Rust. These are crazy alcohol-based paints that dry super matte and with interesting color and value variations. At least that's what I've seen and read online. Honestly, I've never quite gotten these to work right, so I'm excited to be trying them out and hopefully I can get them working here. Yeah, okay, they dried pretty sweet this time. But it's a bit more splotchy than I like, so I took a damp brush and re-wetted and feathered out some of the edges before letting it all dry again. Reactivation is something I've really been growing to like recently. Any paint that allows me to adjust later on has its place in my hobby arsenal. There we go. These are looking killer now, and I'm happy to call them done. Alright, on to the barricades. For these models, I found some sweet energy barricades on Thingiverse, and I'm stoked to paint them up. They have these little inserts so you can change them from being terrain that you can fire and fight over to completely blocking line of sight. Printing out 10 bases with inserts took about 5 hours. And another hour just for the inserts, which I had to reprint due to this lovely print failure right here. This failure was almost certainly my fault, not the printer's. Started out with a gray primer, then did an overall coat of jade before going back in with black to darken down the metal bits, which I dry brushed with a steely metal color before going in with some more Dirty Down Rust. And this was a huge mistake. The Dirty Down looks great, but I forgot the crucial step of washing before weathering. To attempt to remedy this, I brought out another style of reactivating paint, oil wash. My thought was that I could apply the wash everywhere, wait for it to dry, then use mineral spirits to remove what I don't want. And this worked almost how I thought it would, but unfortunately it seems that the Dirty Down Rust soaked up the pigment, and the mineral spirits just weren't getting it back out. Oh well, this will be a great opportunity to show you how you can do rust without any specialty paints. What you're going to need is a reddish brown, an orangish reddish brown, and an orange. Sponge it all on sequentially from darkest brown to orange. And at the end you have something like this. Not quite as realistic as Dirty Down, but nice and simple. And way cheaper. And these barricades look fantastic when I put them together. I really love these free models. Next up in the 10th edition rulebook is statues and battlefield debris. These are classic terrain features, granting cover to any units that are partially obscured by it visually, and a staple on any 40k table. For the statue, I found a great option on Thingiverse, and got it printed in no time at all on the Creality K1. It took just 2 hours to print out, which is kinda crazy. I tried to slice it as if I was gonna print it on my old printer, the Ender 3, and on that machine it would have taken almost 6.5 hours. So this is a pretty crazy upgrade. To paint this bad boy, we're going to start with a gray primer, then bring it up to what I'm going to refer to as a standard gray. This gray is created by pushing some dark blue into the recesses and anywhere I think shadows are going to be. Then I use some dark green in patches across the model. In some areas this is used to blend the dark blue into the gray, and in other areas it's just a splotchy green to add some variety. With the blue and the green down, I sponged on some bright gray that really makes this whole thing look kind of awful. But that's okay. This is essentially an underpainting technique that will really sing once we bring out an ancient 16th century Renaissance technique, which I will divulge to you once we get to the ruins. For now, let's set this to the side and start with some battlefield debris. Back in the rulebook, Games Workshop features some really sick looking power generators with some great blue OSL. Let's try to replicate that here with these models that I found for free out of my mini factory. I start out with a black primer, then dry brushed a medium metallic color all over to brighten it back up. I was sure not to get paint too far into the recesses, so they stayed nice and dark. Then I went around with some copper metallic paint to pick out some of the details and add metallic variety to the generators. Last metallic step was to crack open some chrome paint and dry brush that on using only downward motions, so the bright metal will only hit the topmost edges, making them pop a bit more. With that done, let's move on to some OSL. I started out by painting all the generator coils gray. Then focusing on just where the coils meet, I painted in some bluish white color, followed by a pure white. Focusing on the in-between areas like this is going to make the center of this energy stack look the hottest, and will trick our eyes into thinking that it's glowing once we apply a translucent, bluish-greenish color. I use an airbrush here, but you could totally do this with a brush as well. Just make sure to glaze on the color slowly, and don't let any paint pool in the recesses, darkening them. That would be a surefire way to ruin the OSL. After that, I brought out the Dirty Down and applied that to where I wanted the generators to start being rusty. No washes are needed beforehand this time, since the dry brushing stages left the recesses nice and dark. Like my soul. Alright, I'm loving these generators. Can't wait to see these bad boys on the table. But before we can do that, we gotta get through a few more pieces of terrain. Alright, next type of terrain from the rulebook is hills, industrial structures, sealed bunkers, and armored containers. All these are considered raised surfaces in the rules, and act in the same way as statues and battlefield debris, granting cover to units whose line of sight is secured by them. First on the list is hills, but here's the deal. I ain't doing hills. See, hills look awful on most tables where the pieces of terrain are separate, like most tournament tables. Sure, they look great on full table builds, but rules-wise, where do they start and where do they end? It is very ambiguous, and ambiguity is the death of competitive rules. So, we ain't doing hills. And I don't want to waste materials on a hill. Even though this printer is fast, what's the point in printing out some lumpy rocks? But bunkers, on the other hand, yeah, I can mess with some bunkers. I found this great super imperial-y looking bunker on Thingiverse. I printed it out as one piece and brought it up to the same standard gray that we went over with the statue. But this time I went a little bit brighter to make it seem like it wasn't made from exactly the same materials. After that, I used black paint to darken down the middle bits, and dry brushed on a steely metallic color. And I know what you're thinking, this absolutely looks like trash. But just like with the statue, we're going to put that to the side for now and tackle the final steps at the end with the ruins. The last step is going to pull it all together, trust me. For now, let's get on with an industrial structure. The model I'm going to use for this is really cool. It is designed to use filament spools as a base to create some sort of industrial silo. Just take these two pieces and glue them in the sides, and take the top part and plop it on top. Super cool concept overall, and it's a great way to repurpose And it's a great way to repurpose those filament spools instead of just tossing them out. To paint this, I started out with a black prime, then used a makeup brush to get the metal color all over. Afterwards, I added on some transparent brown to shift the color and splotched it not quite everywhere. Now to change things up, we're going to break out the airbrush, and this is going to be the only time we're going to use this in the video, because with this particular technique, a regular brush just doesn't work. We're going to use the airbrush to spray on some hair juice. What is hair juice? Well, hair juice is hairspray that has been decanted into a bottle. Then when shooting it through an airbrush, it turns into hairspray, and we can all sit and wonder why we even went through this whole process. Hairspray is basically a poor man's chipping medium. After applying a coat of paint on top of the hairspray, you can go back in with water to reactivate the hairspray and start pulling up paint, which gives a super cool chipped paint effect. I did this here and there around the silo to my heart's content, making it look real weathered and nasty. This is a great starting point, but we can push the chipped paint effect even further. What you're going to want to do is down your ups and up your downs. Nick, what the heck are you talking about? Let me explain. We're going to take some dark black paint to outline the top parts of all the paint chips. This will make it look like there are shadows under the chipping paint. This is downing your ups. Sometimes it's obvious where this will be, right where there is a stark line between paint and the undercoat, but sometimes you need to just go in and make your own shadows. After that, we're going to up the downs, taking a bright version of the blue paint and go to the bottom edges to make it look like the light is catching on paint that's peeling up. After that, I'm going to go back in with the original jade color and do a bit of blending so the highlights don't have as much of a harsh transition. Then go back in with a makeup brush loaded with some metallic paint to restipple on some bright bits. And if you're addicted to rust like me, maybe add in some dirty down. God, it just looks so good. It's so rusty. This is what they look like at the end, and I think it looks pretty awesome. But let's not dilly-dally. We got more stuff to paint. Next up is some containers. I found these imperial-looking containers absolutely free on Thingiverse. Printed them all off in no time at all, just a couple hours on the K1, and started painting. I start out with a gray primer on all the interior panels that I want to be colorful, then hit those spots with the pop color for this terrain set, Jade. After that dried, I primed all the metal bits with a black primer. Brushing it on is giving me the option to use more than one color primer, and to choose exactly where I want those colors to go, something that airbrush or rattle can priming just doesn't let you do. And after that, I followed basically the same recipe as the barriers. Dry brush the metallics on and add on some dirty down rust before washing the darn thing, because I'm a child and I can't learn from my mistakes. Maybe next time. I guess I'll just leave this as is. I think it looks pretty good anyway. Next up to paint is another wargaming staple, woods. For the base of these trees, I started to print out the largest crater again, but cut the printer off after the first 3 or 4 layers. I just want a base to start from, which I can then prime gray and add on some nice goop. I used a brownish textured goop from Vallejo and let it dry overnight. Once dried, I dry brushed on a brighter brown color, followed by the same bright brown mixed in with a bit of off-white to brighten things up. I focus on the outside edges with this second dry brushing, as this is where more light would fall. The center of it would be covered in shadow from the trees. To tie everything together, I massaged a transparent brown all over the textured base and got to work on the trees. These trees were found on Thingiverse and were made for some hex-based game. To paint them, I started with a gray primer before going all over with a nice darkish green. I really like the idea of pine trees for this, but don't see them very often in wargaming. Usually you see like the Citadel ones with their crazy branches everywhere and they just get in the way. I mean, who needs branches? Using a dry brush, I progressively added on more and more bright green using downward brush strokes. And at the end we have these. Some nice happy trees on a quaint little base. A very peaceful, pleasant terrain for horrifyingly violent wargames. Nice. And now, finally, it's time for the ruins. I'm gonna start by bringing these up to the same standard gray, just like the statue and bunker earlier. And while I do that, I want to talk about this printer that Creality sent out, the K1. It's a fantastic printer. It prints fast as heck. This particular piece of ruins took 4.5 hours on the K1, compared to 13 hours if I tried to print it on the Ender 3. Which brings up a small gripe I have with the marketing around the printer. They claim that it's 12 times faster than most, but that's just the max print speed of 600 millimeters per second compared to a standard 50. The thing is, the printer doesn't go max speed full time. I've consistently gotten about 5 times faster than the Ender 3 with it, which is still a huge improvement. But I think Creality should be a little bit more forthcoming about what that 12 times speed really means. The slicing software that comes with it has been nice. It has a one-click print feature that lets me start prints from my computer instead of going back and forth with a USB drive. Pretty sweet. Overall though, I love the printer. Thank you for sending it over, Creality. If you are interested, I will put an affiliate link down in the description below. If you purchase it through that link, Creality will give me a small commission, but you won't have to pay any more for it. Alright, let's get back to painting. After working the ruins up to the standard gray, it's time to bring out the secret painting technique never divulged before to many painters. At least if you don't consider my previous videos. This is gouache paint, the best paint I still can't spell. Gouache is opaque watercolor paints, and what that means is you can reactivate it with water after it dries. So we're going to create a nice thick wash with gouache and douse the terrain with it. I squirted out some browns, black, blue, and greens into a cup and mixed it all up super well. Seriously, you gotta mix this thing for a good 5 minutes or so to get it all broken down. What you're looking for is the consistency of chocolate milk that you've left out in your room for a few days, and you totally forgot about it until you started noticing a strange smell from the corner. Kind of thick like this. Now, I'm not joking when I tell you need to smother your models in this stuff. We want it everywhere and we want it thick, so it can coat and darken down the models completely. I smothered the ruins as well as the statue and bunker from earlier. When it's dry, we can come back with a damp rag and start to reactivate the wash with water and slowly pull it back away from the model. I go in gently with a rag at first to get the paint wet again and keep moving it around the areas light would naturally fall, and leaving the areas that would be in shadow dark. This creates a fantastic transition from light to dark. Once everything is dry, we can add in some final details. No need to varnish after gouache unless you are really worried about a sweaty gamer, like me, dripping onto it and reactivating the paint again. And with those finished pieces, we have painted every single type of 40K terrain except for hills. But who needs hills anyway? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, it would mean a lot to me if you hit that like button. It helps more people see this and appease the almighty YouTube gods. Huge shout out to my patrons. Thank you all so much for supporting this channel. I really wouldn't be able to make videos like this without you. If you want to see some cool speed painting techniques, you can watch that video right here. Until next time, y'all, stay healthy and take care. Bye.
Oh, my legs, my legs.
It was recording, right?